For our 15th wedding anniversary, my husband gave me an envelope, but inside wasn't a love letter. It was a betrayal. The DNA test results claimed our 10-year-old son wasn't his. My vows of faithfulness were shattered by cold science, and my husband walked out, leaving me in the ruins of our life. But he didn't know that the real lie was far deeper and darker, hidden in a secret kept by his own blood. Dear friends, your comments and support mean the world to us. Tell us, what challenges have you faced in life, or maybe you're facing right now? Like this video and write where you are watching us from. We will be happy to send you our regards. So stay with us. Don't miss what's coming next. The scent of grilled peaches and cinnamon hung in the warm July air, a sweet, hazy testament to 15 years of marriage. Our backyard in the Atlanta suburbs was our sanctuary, a world we had built together, filled with the scent of my prize-winning lilies and the sound of cicadas buzzing their lazy summer song. Inside, the remnants of our anniversary dinner sat on the dining room table, a bottle of good Merlot, 2/3 empty, the last slice of my famous peach cobbler, and a single crisp white envelope that lay beside my plate like a coiled snake. My husband, Michael, stood by the window, his back to me, looking out at the yard where our 2 children had spent their childhoods. Even after all these years, the sight of his broad shoulders, the steady, solid presence of him was the anchor of my world. He was a good man, a kind man. The kind of man who fixed leaky faucets without being asked and who had never once forgotten the anniversary of our first date, which made the presence of that envelope all the more terrifying. I know you think this is a gift, but how could you? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, afraid that anything louder would shatter the fragile peace of the evening. I held the envelope between 2 fingers, the paper cool and slick against my skin. It felt heavier than it should, weighted with more than just the single sheet of paper I knew was inside. On our anniversary, Michael. Our 15th anniversary. He didn't turn around, but I saw the muscles in his back tense beneath his linen shirt. You need to understand, Sharon. I had a right to know. His voice was low and strained, a sound I had never heard from him before. In 15 years, we'd had disagreements, of course. We'd argued about money, about parenting, about which movie to watch on a Friday night. But we had never had a fight that felt like this, like the ground beneath our feet was cracking open, revealing a dark, bottomless chasm. Our home, a place I had always associated with warmth and laughter, suddenly felt alien and cold, the air thick with unspoken words. Why does a place that holds so many happy memories feel so menacing when the foundation of those memories is threatened? It's because the ghosts of the past can only offer comfort when the present is secure. No, what? I finally said, my voice rising, gaining an edge of the hysteria that was clawing at my throat. I tossed the envelope onto the polished cherry wood of the table. It landed with a soft, definitive slap. That Marcus isn't your son? Michael, this is a mistake, a monstrous, ridiculous mistake. I have never, ever been unfaithful to you. Do you hear me? Not once in 15 years. He finally turned to face me, and the look in his eyes made my heart stop. The warm, steady brown I knew so well was now a turbulent storm of pain and a raw, ragged anger. He looked like a man who had been betrayed by the one thing he believed was true. Then you explain it to me, Sharon, he said, his voice dangerously quiet as he pointed to the envelope. You explain those results to me. Explain why that piece of paper says the probability of my paternity is less than 1%. The front door, which we'd left open to catch the evening breeze, slammed shut. Both of our heads snapped toward the sound. Our daughter Brianna stood in the doorway, her basketball shorts and tank top a jarring splash of teenage normalcy in the suddenly suffocating atmosphere of the room. At 14, she was a perfect fusion of the two of us, with my smile and her father's height and his deep, perceptive eyes. Those eyes, so much like Michael's, swept the scene, taking in the tense set of our shoulders, the wine-stained tablecloth, the single ominous envelope on the table. What's going on in here? She asked, her brow furrowing. Are you guys fighting? On your anniversary? My instincts, honed by years of motherhood, took over. I snatched the envelope from the table, my movements quick and furtive, and tucked it under a napkin. No, honey, of course not, I said, forcing a smile that felt brittle and fake. Your father and I were just having a serious discussion about work. Brianna's eyes narrowed. She had inherited her father's inability to suffer fools gladly. On a Saturday? Okay, whatever. I'm going over to Kiana's. We're going to the movies. She gave us one last suspicious look before grabbing her backpack and heading back out the door. leaving a whirlwind of teenage energy and a heavy adult silence in her wake. As soon as the door closed, I sank into a chair, the adrenaline leaving my body in a rush, leaving me weak and trembling. "Where's Marcus?" I asked, my voice small. "The Jacksons picked him up from basketball practice," Michael said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion as he refilled his wine glass. "He's staying the night." He took a long swallow of wine. "Funny, isn't it? We're celebrating 15 years of building a life together, and I just found out that for 10 of those years, I've been raising another man's child." The casual cruelty of his words was like a physical blow. The idea was so preposterous, so alien to the life I had lived that I couldn't even process it. It was like he was speaking a foreign language, describing a life that could not be my own. "He is not another man's child?" I shot back, my voice rising from a whisper to a raw, ragged cry. I shot to my feet, the chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. "He is our son!" "Your son? How can you even let those words out of your mouth? How can you stand there in this house and say that about Marcus?" The years of love and trust, the sacred unspoken vows of our family, felt like they were being desecrated by this single, ugly accusation. My rage was a physical thing, a hot, roaring fire in my chest that burned away the shock, leaving only a desperate need to make him see, to make him understand the monstrousness of what he was suggesting. "You were there," I cried, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "You held him a minute after he was born. You cried, Michael. You told me he was the most beautiful thing you had ever seen. You taught him how to ride a bike. You sat with him for hours building that ridiculous volcano for his science fair. Those memories, that love. Is all of that a lie to you now?" Michael winced, the pain on his face deepening. This was not a man acting out of pure malice. This was a man drowning in a sea of doubt, and he was trying to pull me under with him. "Don't you dare use our memories against me, Sharon," he said, his voice thick with a hurt that mirrored my own. "Everything I did because I thought he was my son. I thought that love was built on a truth. What am I supposed to do with it now? What am I supposed to feel when I look at him, knowing that his blood, his history comes from someone else? A stranger? A man you lied to me about?" The accusation of lying, of such a profound and fundamental betrayal, was so far from the reality of the life I had lived that I felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. He was describing a woman I did not know, a life I had not led. My mind, frantic and reeling, flashed back to the day Marcus was born. I remembered the exhaustion, the pain, and then the overwhelming world-altering rush of love as they placed him in my arms. But the most vivid memory was of Michael. He had stood by my bedside, his big, capable hands looking so clumsy and tender as he touched Marcus's tiny fingers. There were tears streaming down his face, and he had leaned down and whispered to me, "Thank you. Thank you for giving me a son." That man, the man with tears of gratitude in his eyes, felt like a ghost now, a visitor from a past that was being systematically erased by the man standing in front of me, his eyes filled with suspicion and pain. How could those two men be the same person? It felt like a betrayal, not just of me, but of the loving, trusting man Michael himself used to be. It was into this charged, impossible moment that our daughter walked. Brianna's sudden appearance in the doorway was a bucket of ice water, shocking us out of our private hell and into the harsh, public light of parenthood. The need to protect her, to shield her from this adult catastrophe, was a primal instinct that momentarily overrode everything else. I saw the same instinct flash in Michael's eyes. We were no longer just a husband and wife in crisis. We were parents, and our child was watching. My snatching of the envelope, my forced, brittle smile, his tense silence. It was a clumsy, desperate performance, a pantomime of normalcy that fooled neither of us, and certainly didn't fool our daughter. Brianna, with the sharp, unforgiving eyes of a teenager, saw right through it. On a Saturday? "Okay, whatever," she'd said, her skepticism a clear indictment of our poor acting. The moment the front door clicked shut behind her, the fragile truce shattered, and the suffocating silence rushed back in. But the heat of our anger had cooled slightly, leaving behind the cold, heavy dread of the real question. What now? I sank back into my chair, the fight draining out of me, replaced by a deep, weary sorrow. "Why, Michael?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why would you do this?" Behind my back? After 15 years of a good marriage, of love and trust, what happened to make you doubt me like this? He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of profound exhaustion and distress. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared at the wine stain on the tablecloth as if it held the answers to the universe. It wasn't something that I wanted to do, he said, his voice low. I fought it for weeks. I told myself I was crazy. Fought what? What started this? I pressed, my voice gaining a desperate edge. I needed to understand the origin of this poison, the source of the infection that was now threatening to kill our marriage. This didn't come from nowhere. Someone put this idea in your head, didn't they? The thought was a sudden, chilling realization. This wasn't just about Michael's own insecurities. This was an attack. Someone from the outside had thrown this bomb into our home. A wave of cold fury washed over me, directed now not at my confused, grieving husband, but at this faceless enemy. Who hated us enough to do this? Who would want to destroy our family with such a vicious, calculated lie? Michael finally looked at me, and his gaze was that of a man lost at sea, clinging to a piece of wreckage that was dragging him under. It was Reggie, he said, the name dropping into the silent room with a dead weight. For a moment, my mind went blank. The name was a ghost from a past we had long since buried, a character from a chapter of our lives I thought had been closed forever. Reggie, his former business partner, the man who had nearly destroyed Michael's first construction company a decade ago, the man Michael had once called a snake with a smile. Reggie, the name came out of my mouth as a choked, incredulous gasp. You're talking about Reggie Hudson? The man who tried to embezzle from you? The man who forged your signature on supply invoices? That Reggie? A hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat. The sheer mind-bending absurdity of it was almost too much to bear. It was like being told your house had been burned down on the advice of a known arsonist. Michael, you can't be serious. You haven't spoken to him in 10 years. You hate him. You told me he was the most dishonest, manipulative man you had ever met. I know, he said, and the shame in his voice was palpable. He sank onto the edge of the sofa, his head in his hands. I know all that. We ran into each other at a hardware store a few weeks ago. It was awkward. We made some small talk. He asked about you, about the kids. And then he said it. Just a little comment. Slipped in like a knife. Said what? I demanded, crossing the room to stand in front of him, needing to see his face, needing to understand the mechanics of this madness. Michael looked up, his eyes swimming with a mixture of shame and a stubborn, lingering doubt. He was talking about the old days, about the big project I was managing out of state. He said, man, you were gone a lot back then. Good thing Sharon had me to keep her company. He smirked when he said it, Sharon, that same old snake-like smirk. The image was so vivid, so perfectly in character for Reggie that I could see it myself. It was an act of pure, distilled malice, a parting shot from a bitter, defeated man, fired a decade after the war was over. And my husband, my strong, smart, perceptive husband, had walked right into it. And you believed him? I cried, my voice breaking with the sheer, soul-crushing weight of his betrayal. You believed a lie from the mouth of a man you know to be a liar. A man who has every reason in the world to hate you, to want to see you suffer. You believed him over me, your wife of 15 years? I didn't want to. He shot back, his own anguish erupting. I told myself he was lying. I spent 2 weeks telling myself he was a pathetic, jealous snake trying to get a final jab in. But the thought... It was a seed, Sharon. It planted itself in my mind and it started to grow. I started remembering things. Remembering what? I asked, my voice dripping with a cold fury. Remembering all the times I loved you, supported you, stood by you when that man tried to ruin us? Is that what you remembered? I remembered how much I was traveling that year, he said, his voice a low, painful rasp, his logic a twisted, desperate attempt to justify the unjustifiable. Weeks at a time sometimes. And I started looking at Marcus, really looking at him. He doesn't look like me. He doesn't look like anyone in my family. He's got your eyes, but everything else. And the timeline, it fits. It all fits. It was the flimsiest case in the world, a house of cards built on the word of a con man and a child's facial features. But the DNA test, that damnable piece of paper, had become his cornerstone, turning a flimsy structure of doubt into an impenetrable fortress of certainty. Logic was useless. My history of faithfulness was irrelevant. My word meant nothing. He had chosen to believe a piece of paper, co-signed by his worst enemy, over the woman who had shared his bed, his life, his heart. The fight went out of me then, replaced by a cold, hollow emptiness. The foundation of our marriage, what I had believed to be solid rock, was revealed to be nothing but sand, and it was all washing out to sea. We were at an impasse. He was locked in his certainty, and I was locked in my truth. There was no bridge between our two realities. The silence that fell between us was different from all the silences that had come before. It was not the silence of a truce or of a temporary ceasefire. It was the silence of an ending. Finally, he stood up, his movements heavy, weary. "I can't," he said, his voice rough with an emotion I couldn't name. "I can't be here right now. I need time to think, to figure this all out." He walked out of the room and I heard his footsteps on the stairs. A few minutes later, he came back down with a small duffel bag in his hand. My heart, which I thought could not break any further, fractured into a million pieces. He was leaving. "I'm going to stay with my brother for a couple of days," he said, not looking at me, his eyes fixed on the front door as if it were a life raft. I did not ask him to stay. My pride, my pain, my profound sense of being wronged formed a wall of silence around me. I simply stood there, in the middle of our beautiful dining room, and watched him. I watched the love of my life, my partner, the father of my children, pick up a duffel bag and walk out of the home we had built together. The front door clicked shut behind him, and the sound was a deafening finality. I was alone, surrounded by the wreckage of our anniversary, the wilting lilies, the half-eaten cobbler, the cooling candles, and the white envelope, still lying on the table, the paper anniversary gift that had just burned my entire life to the ground. The first night of my new, shattered life was the longest I had ever endured. After the sound of Michael's car faded into the suburban quiet, the silence he left behind was a physical presence. It was a thick, suffocating blanket that smothered every happy memory our home contained. I wandered through the rooms, a ghost in my own life, touching the objects we had chosen together. The worn armchair, where he read stories to the children, the collection of sea glass on the windowsill from our first family vacation, the faint pencil, mark on a doorframe measuring Marcus's height at age 6. Each object was a testament to a shared history that a single piece of paper had just declared a fiction. I was adrift in a sea of memory, with no land in sight. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the pain and suspicion in Michael's face, a look I never thought I would see directed at me. I replayed 15 years of our life together, searching for a crack, a moment of weakness, a single misstep that could have led us here. There was nothing. Our marriage hadn't been a perfect fairy tale, but it had been real. It had been built on a foundation of laughter, mutual respect, and a deep, abiding love. Or so I had thought. Sometime before dawn, in the cool, gray light that precedes the sun, the grief began to recede, leaving behind the hard, cold bedrock of anger. It was a quiet, clean anger, directed not just at Michael for his catastrophic lapse in faith, but at the faceless forces that had conspired to poison him against me. Reggie, a snake with a smile. The anger was a fuel, burning away the despair. I would not let that man, that bitter, jealous ghost from our past, succeed in destroying my family. I would not be a passive victim in the demolition of my own life. I got out of bed, walked into the bathroom, and looked at my reflection in the mirror. I saw the face of a 42-year-old woman with tired, swollen eyes and the first faint lines of a life well lived etched around them. I had been a wife, a mother, a partner. I was not a liar, I was not an adulterer, and I would not let anyone, not even the man I loved, define me as one. In that moment, a new resolve settled over me. I could not sit and wait for Michael to think. His thinking was contaminated, infected by a lie. If he was lost in a fog of doubt, then I would have to be the lighthouse. I would have to be the one to guide us back to the truth, even if I had to do it alone. My first step was clear. The poison had been delivered in a lab-certified envelope. I would fight this fire with a fire of my own. I went to my laptop, my fingers flying across the keyboard, the clicks echoing in the silent house. I ignored the slick pop-up ads for Gen Lab, the company whose name was printed on the damning report. I searched for the most reputable, state-certified, university-affiliated genetics laboratory in Georgia. I found one, associated with Emory University, with a list of credentials as long as my arm. I booked an appointment for the next day. a peace of mind paternity test. The irony of the phrase was a bitter pill, but the act of making the appointment, of taking a concrete, tangible step, was the first breath of air after being held underwater. I was no longer just a grieving wife. I was an investigator, and my own life was the case. I would find the truth, and I would bring it home. After scheduling the new DNA test, a fragile sense of control settled over me, but it wasn't enough. Fighting science with science was one thing, but it didn't address the root of the problem, the poison. A lab could make an error, a test could be faulty, but the malice behind Reggie's words was not an accident. It was a targeted attack. My mind began to work like a detective's, sifting through the facts. Reggie planted the seed, but how did the DNA test, a supposedly objective scientific process, become his weapon? Was it a 1 in a million error that he had simply cruelly exploited, or was it something more deliberate? The thought of a conspiracy felt insane, like something out of a movie, but the alternative, that my husband's faith in me was so flimsy it could be shattered by a single comment from his nemesis, was almost too painful to contemplate. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed an ally, someone who was on my side without question, someone whose belief in me was not a matter for debate. I needed my best friend. I called Denise. We had been friends since high school. Our bond forged in the fires of teenage drama and cemented over 25 years of shared joys and sorrows. She was a head nurse at a downtown hospital, a woman whose entire life was a testament to her pragmatism and her fierce, unwavering loyalty. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, you," she said, her voice warm and familiar. "You're up early. Everything okay?" I opened my mouth to say I was fine. The automatic response of a woman used to hiding her pain, but I couldn't. The dam broke. In a torrent of tears and fractured sentences, I told her everything. The anniversary dinner, the envelope, Michael's accusation, Reggie's name, his departure. She listened in stunned silence, the only sound on her end the occasional sharp intake of breath. When I finished, her response was not one of pity, but of pure, unadulterated rage. "That son of a—" she began, her voice a low growl. "First of all, Michael is a fool for listening to a snake like Reggie. Second, this whole thing stinks to high heaven. Reggie is too stupid to orchestrate something this clever, but he's just malicious enough to be a part of it." She was thinking like a diagnostician, looking for the source of the disease. "We need to go back," she said, her voice now sharp with purpose, "all the way back to the beginning. Marcus's birth, who was around back then who might have had a motive? Who knew you and Michael?" And then she said the name that would add another dark, complicated layer to the whole affair. "What about Brenda?" Brenda. The name was a ghost, a half-forgotten chapter from before my time. She was Michael's college girlfriend, the one he had been with for years before we met. Their breakup had been bad, and I knew she had taken it hard. And as fate would have it, she had been a nurse in the maternity ward at Northside Hospital the year Marcus was born. We had seen her there. A brief, awkward encounter in the hallway. We'd never suspected anything. Why would we? But now, in this new paranoid reality, every past coincidence looked like a potential clue. "Brenda?" I said, my voice weak. "You think she would do something?" After all this time. "I don't know what I think," Denise said honestly. "But she's a loose thread. She had a motive, jealousy. She had the opportunity, access to newborns in a hospital. We need to find her. We need to talk to her." The idea was terrifying, but Denise was right. I had to pull on every thread, no matter where it led. My quest for the truth, however, was about to collide with the most painful reality of all. That afternoon, Brianna came home from her friend Kiana's house. She walked into the kitchen, where I was sitting at the table, a notepad in front of me filled with frantic scribbles about labs and old acquaintances. She saw the remnants of last night's disastrous dinner, which I hadn't had the heart to clear away. She saw the dark circles under my eyes and the cold, focused energy that had replaced my usual maternal warmth. "Okay, what is actually going on?" she demanded, dropping her backpack on the floor. "Dad's not answering his phone and his car is gone. And you look like something terrible has happened." I had to make a choice. Lie to her and protect her childhood for a little while longer, or tell her the truth and risk shattering it forever. I chose the truth. Taking a deep breath, I looked my daughter in the eye and told her. I spoke as calmly as I could, explaining that her father had been given a DNA test that showed he wasn't Marcus's biological father. Her reaction was a physical thing. I saw the color drain from her face, her eyes widening in shock and a deep personal hurt. Her whole world, her whole understanding of her family was tilting on its axis. "What?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Is that even possible?" Then her gaze hardened, her hurt curdling into a teenager's sharp black and white judgment. Did you cheat on Dad?" "No." The word was a shot, a desperate defense of my entire life's integrity. "Brianna, I swear to you, on my life, I have never been with another man. I love your father. But my words, my history, my character, they were no match for the cold, hard certainty of science." She took a step back, her arms wrapping around herself, a sudden chasm opening between us. "But DNA doesn't lie, Mom," she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of tears and accusation. "So if he's not Marcus's dad, then who is? Where did my brother come from?" She didn't wait for an answer. The question was a wound, and she turned and fled from it, running up the stairs to her room. A moment later, I heard her door slam shut, the sound echoing the one my husband had made just hours before. I sat alone at my kitchen table, the list of clues in front of me seeming utterly pointless. I had lost Michael's trust. And now, in my desperate search for the truth, I was losing my daughters too. The stakes of this fight had just been raised to an unbearable height. It was no longer just about my marriage, it was about the very soul of my family. While my world was shrinking to the four walls of a hostile home, Michael was adrift in a sterile, borrowed space. He was staying in the guest room of his younger brother David's downtown condo, a place of cool leather and chrome, as impersonal as a hotel. It was a world away from the warm, chaotic life he had left behind, and the quiet hum of the city 30 floors below offered no comfort. He had the DNA report with him, folded and unfolded so many times the creases were soft as cloth. It was his only anchor, the one solid fact in a world that had dissolved into uncertainty. He believed its cold, clinical print, and yet every memory of the last 15 years screamed that it was a lie. This internal war was tearing him apart. "Are you sure you're thinking straight, Mike?" David had asked him that morning, handing him a mug of coffee. His younger brother was a financial analyst, a man who dealt in numbers and logic, and the raw, unquantifiable emotion of the situation made him uneasy. "I mean, it's Sharon we're talking about." "And you're basing this on the word of Reggie Hudson? The guy's human garbage. You said so yourself for years." "It's not just his word anymore, is it?" Michael had shot back, tapping the report that lay on the kitchen island between them. "It's this. This says it's true. Science says it's true. Science is done by people, Mike, and people make mistakes," David had said quietly, a simple statement of fact that had lodged in Michael's mind like a splinter. He was a builder, a man who trusted blueprints and measurements, a man who believed in verifiable proof. The lab report was his proof. But David was right. The proof had been gathered and interpreted by people. And what if Reggie, the snake, had found a way to poison the well? The thought was a flicker of light in his dark, circular thinking, but it was not enough to overcome the stark, brutal finality of the words on the page, probability of paternity, less than 1%. Feeling lost, adrift between the woman he had loved for 15 years and the truth he held in his hand, Michael did what he always did when the world stopped making sense. He drove to see his grandmother. Mama Rose lived in the same small, immaculately kept house she had lived in for 60 years, a house that smelled of baking yeast and old beloved books. She was the matriarch of their family, an 80-year-old woman with a mind as sharp as a tack and a memory that held their entire family history. She was the keeper of their truth. He found her on her sun porch, tending to her African violets. He sat down, the DNA report in his hand, and told her everything. He laid out his case like a lawyer presenting the evidence. Reggie's comment, Marcus's lack of resemblance to him, and finally the report itself, which he placed on the wicker table between them as if it were an exhibit in a trial. Mama Rose listened patiently, her expression unreadable. When he was finished, she did not look at the report. She looked at him. She didn't offer sympathy. She didn't share in his pain. She just looked at him with a profound, almost amused disappointment. "Tests," she sniffed. The word a dismissal of everything he had just said. A man who has been married to a good woman for 15 years believes a piece of paper over her own 2 eyes? What kind of fool did I help raise? Before he could protest, she stood up, her movements still spry and purposeful. "Stay put," she commanded and disappeared into the house. Michael sat there, stunned by her reaction. He had expected shock, sadness, maybe even anger at Sharon. He had not expected to be called a fool. Mama Rose returned a few moments later, carrying a heavy, leather-bound photo album, its pages yellowed with age. She sat down and opened it on her lap, the old binding creaking in protest. "You say the boy looks nothing like you," she said, her voice a low rumble as she flipped through the brittle pages. "You're right. He doesn't. You are the spitting image of your father, God rest his soul. And your brother David has my side of the family's face. But in our family, Michael, the genes like to play funny tricks. They like to hide for a while and then pop back out when you least expect it." She stopped on a page, a formal portrait of a family he had never met. And in the center of the photo was a young boy, maybe 10 years old, with a serious expression, dark, deep-set eyes, and a stubborn cowlick in his hair. Michael's breath caught in his throat. It was Marcus. The resemblance was not just passing, it was absolute. It was his son, staring back at him from a photograph taken 70 years ago. Who is that?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. Mama Rose tapped a long, elegant finger on the boy's face. "That," she said, a triumphant gleam in her eye, "is your grandfather, James. My late husband, the man whose name you carry." She then got up, took a recent school picture of Marcus from her mantelpiece, and placed it next to the open album. It was undeniable, the same eyes, the same jawline, the same spirit. "You see," Mama Rose said softly, "you were looking for yourself in the boy's face. You should have been looking for your history." Michael stared at the two photographs, the confident, scientific certainty of the lab report suddenly seeming flimsy and arrogant. He was a builder. He knew that a foundation could look solid on the surface, but if the ground beneath it was unstable, the whole structure was a lie. The ground beneath his certainty had just begun to crumble. He looked at the old, faded photograph of his grandfather, then at the glossy new picture of his son. If this history, this tangible, visible truth in front of him was so right, could the piece of paper in his pocket, the one that was tearing his family apart, be so horribly, catastrophically wrong? The question landed with the force of a physical blow, leaving him breathless. My meeting with Brenda was set for a neutral, anonymous coffee shop downtown, a place with no memories and no ghosts. Denise had found her through the nursing alumni network, and to my surprise, Brenda had agreed to meet immediately, her voice on the phone sounding not hostile, but weary. I went into that meeting with my heart hammering, my mind a whirlwind of paranoid scenarios. Was she the mastermind? A woman nursing a broken heart for 2 decades, waiting for the perfect moment to exact her revenge? Was she in league with Reggie? Or was she just an innocent bystander, another piece of collateral damage in the explosion of my life? The woman who sat across from me in the worn vinyl booth was not the villain I had braced myself for. The Brenda I remembered from that brief, awkward hospital encounter was a sharp, pretty girl with a fire in her eyes. The woman before me now was in her 40s, a tired-looking mother of 2 with faint lines of exhaustion around her eyes and a faded hospital ID still clipped to the collar of her scrubs. She looked at me not with malice, but with a deep, profound weariness. "Denise told me a little of what's going on," she said, stirring her coffee, her gaze fixed on the swirling liquid, "but I need to hear it from you." "Why am I here, Sharon?" I told her. I laid out the whole ugly story, the envelope, the accusation, Reggie's name, and my desperate search for the truth. As I spoke, her expression shifted from weariness to a shocked disbelief, which quickly curdled into a familiar, righteous anger on my behalf. "Reggie Hudson," she spat, her voice dripping with contempt. "That man is a bottom feeder. I'm not surprised he'd try to hurt Michael, but to use your son? To do this?" She shook her head, a flash of the old fire returning to her eyes. "So you didn't?" I began, my voice trailing off, unable to finish the accusation. She finally looked at me, and her gaze was direct and unflinching. "Sharon, Michael broke my heart in college. It took me a long time to get over him, but I did. I have a husband, 2 kids, a mortgage, and a job I love. The idea that I would hold a grudge for 20 years and then do something as insane, as monstrous as swapping a baby in a maternity ward, it's insulting." Her denial was so absolute, so grounded in the reality of her own life that I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, she was telling the truth. I felt a wave of relief, followed by a renewed sense of despair. I had reached a dead end. We sat in silence for a moment, 2 women connected by the same man, our lives having taken such drastically different paths. "I'm sorry," I said finally. "I'm so sorry to have dragged you into this. I'm desperate." Brenda took a long sip of her coffee, her brow furrowed in thought. "It's okay," she said. "I get it." She was about to say something else, to offer a final sympathetic platitude and leave, but she paused, a flicker of something, a memory, crossing her face. "You know," she said slowly, "it's probably nothing, just a weird coincidence." "What?" I leaned forward, every nerve in my body on high alert. "What coincidence?" "My sister's daughter, my niece Elisa," she said, still hesitant. "She's a smart kid, got a biology degree. She works as a lab tech. And the place she works, I'm pretty sure it's called Gen Lab." My heart stopped. Gen Lab. The name from the envelope, the source of the poison. "She knows all about me and Michael, of course," Brenda continued, oblivious to the bomb she had just detonated. "You know how families are. The old stories get passed down. She always felt like he did me wrong." She shrugged, gathering her purse. "Like I said, probably just a coincidence. I hope you figure this all out, Sharon. For what it's worth, I never for one second believed you would cheat on anyone." She gave me a final, sad smile and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving me stunned and breathless in the vinyl booth. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a connection. A direct, personal link between the lab that had certified my betrayal and a young woman with a misguided sense of family loyalty. My investigation, which had seemed to hit a brick wall, now had a clear, terrifying, and very personal target, a lab tech named Elisa. The light about Elisa, the lab tech niece of Michael's spurned ex-girlfriend, was a shot of pure adrenaline. For the first time since Michael had walked out the door, I felt a surge of real, tangible hope. The vague, shadowy conspiracy now had a potential face, a name, a motive. A misguided young woman steeped in the family lore of her aunt's broken heart, manipulated by a venomous man like Reggie. It was a narrative that made a horrifying kind of sense. All I needed now was the final piece of the puzzle, the one that would prove the Gen Lab test was a malicious lie. That proof, I was certain, was waiting for me in the results of the second test from the Emory University lab. I pinned all my hopes on that email. It would be my vindication, the clean, scientific sword that would cut through this web of deceit and bring my husband home. I spent 2 days in a state of suspended animation, checking my email every 5 minutes, my stomach twisting into a fresh knot each time the inbox refreshed. The house was a pressure cooker of anxiety. Brianna was still a ghost, emerging from her room only for meals, which we ate in a silence so thick and heavy it felt like a physical object on the table between us. I tried to talk to her, but her responses were monosyllabic, her eyes veiled with a hurt and suspicion that I couldn't seem to penetrate. She was waiting, just as I was, for a verdict. My entire future, the fate of my family, felt dependent on the contents of a single digital file. On the third day, it arrived. The subject line was stark and impersonal. R.E. Paternity Test Results, Case Number 734B. My hands trembled so violently I could barely control the mouse to click on it. I opened the email and saw the attached PDF, a document that held the power to either restore my world or shatter it completely. I took a deep, shuddering breath and opened it. The report was different from the Gen Lab one. More detailed, more professional, filled with charts and markers and scientific jargon I didn't understand. But my eyes scanned past all of that, searching for the one section that mattered, the one labeled conclusion. And then I saw it. The words leaped off the page, each one a separate, brutal blow. Based on the analysis of the genetic markers, the alleged father is excluded as the biological father of the child. The combined paternity index is 0. The probability of paternity is 0.00%. It was a perfect echo of the first report. The air rushed from my lungs, a silent, strangled scream. For a long, terrifying moment, the room began to tilt. The floor seemed to drop away, leaving me free-falling into a black abyss of self-doubt. 2 labs, 2 separate tests. The same impossible conclusion. Was I insane? Had I constructed a false memory of my own life? Was there some dark, traumatic secret my own mind had buried? A betrayal so profound I couldn't bear to remember it? The foundation of my own identity, my own certainty, and my truth began to crumble. It was the most terrifying moment of my life. A psychological vertigo that threatened to consume me entirely. I gripped the edge of the desk, my knuckles white, anchoring myself against the wave of nausea and madness. But then, through the fog of despair, a single stubborn thought broke through. Number. It was not a thought, but a feeling. A deep, cellular knowledge that was more profound than any scientific report. I knew my own body. I knew my own life. I had been faithful to my husband. That was the one, unshakable truth in a world of lies and confusing science. And if that truth was real, then everything else, no matter how certain it seemed, had to be wrong. The despair receded, replaced by a new white-hot anger. An anger not just at Reggie or Michael, but at the arrogant certainty of science itself, at these faceless reports that dared to tell me who I was. My hands, now steady, flew across the keyboard. I found the main number for the Emory Genetics Department. I would not accept this. I would not be erased by a probability index. I was transferred twice before I was finally connected with a doctor, Aris Thorne, a senior genetic counselor. My voice was not hysterical. It was the voice of a woman who had been pushed past the breaking point and had found something hard and unyielding on the other side. I laid out the whole impossible story. My 15-year faithful marriage, the first test from a questionable lab, and now his own lab's identical, impossible result. I told him about the conspiracy I suspected, but I also told him with every ounce of conviction I possessed that I was telling the truth. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I expected dismissal, a polite clinical explanation of the infallibility of his lab's methods. Instead, he said, "That is highly unusual, Mrs. Miller." I heard him typing in the background. "Let me pull up the raw data from your case file." He was quiet for another minute. "Well," he said, his voice a mixture of professional skepticism and genuine scientific curiosity. "The results are clean. No sign of contamination, and the markers are unambiguous. Having an error of this magnitude happen in 2 separate facilities is statistically astronomical." "But it's wrong," I insisted, my voice low and fierce. "Or," he said, and I could almost hear the gears of his scientific mind turning, "the standard test itself is not equipped for your specific biology." He paused. "Mrs. Miller, this is incredibly rare. So rare it's the kind of thing we read about in textbooks, not see in our daily work. But there are certain genetic anomalies that can produce a false negative in a standard paternity test. Conditions like genetic chimerism, where a person, in essence, has 2 distinct sets of DNA. Or, even more likely, a rare mutation in one of the specific Y chromosome markers we use for the test. If your husband has such a mutation and your son inherited it, the standard test would read it as a non-match. A new, dizzying possibility opened up before me, a sliver of light in the absolute darkness. "So you're saying it's possible?" I whispered. "It is a 1 in a million shot," he said, his voice cautious, "but it is a scientific possibility that your husband is the biological father, and the tests are still, from a certain point of view, correct. The only way to know for sure would be to conduct a much more extensive test, a whole genome sequence, on both father and son." He told me it would be expensive, that it would take weeks. But he had given me something more valuable than a clean result. He had given me a lifeline, a scientific theory, however improbable, that fit the facts of my life without requiring me to be a liar or to have lost my mind. The enemy was no longer just a conspiracy of men. It was a quirk of nature itself, a secret hidden deeper than a jealous rival's lie, a secret hidden in my husband's own blood. Michael drove away from his grandmother's house in a daze, the image of the 2 photographs burned into his mind. The faded, sepia-toned face of his grandfather, a boy he'd never met, and the vibrant, living face of his son, they were one and the same. Mama Rose, with her simple ancestral wisdom, had done what he, with all his logic and reason, had failed to do. She had shown him a truth that was deeper than science, a truth written in the very code of their family's story. The DNA report, which had felt like an immovable stone of fact, now seemed like a flimsy, fraudulent piece of paper. His certainty, which had been his anchor for 2 agonizing weeks, was gone. In its place was a vast, terrifying sea of doubt and the dawning, sickening horror that he had made a catastrophic mistake. He, Michael, a man who built things for a living, who understood the importance of a solid foundation, had just taken a sledgehammer to the footings of his own home based on the word of a saboteur. His grief, which had been a clean, sharp pain over a perceived betrayal, began to curdle into something much uglier, a profound and corrosive guilt. He thought of Sharon's face, her shock, her hurt, her fierce, unwavering denials. He had seen her pain, but he had chosen to believe it was the performance of a guilty woman, not the agony of an innocent one. The memory of his own coldness, his own accusations, now made him physically ill. The rage he felt was no longer a confused, wounded thing. It was a cold, hard, and perfectly aimed fury. And its target was Reggie Hudson. He would not go back to Sharon with just a photograph and a half-baked apology. He owed her more than that. He owed her the truth, the whole truth, dragged out into the light. He owed her a confession, not his, but Reggie's. He found Reggie not at his home, but at the dusty, half-finished construction site of a small strip mall on the south side of the city. It was a pathetic enterprise compared to the successful firm Michael had built after their partnership had dissolved. Reggie was standing by a truck, shouting at a worker, his face flushed with impotent anger. He was a man who had soured, who had let his bitterness curdle his ambition. When he saw Michael's truck pull up, his face went pale. Michael got out of the truck, and the controlled, contained power of his fury was a palpable thing. He was a big man, his body hardened by years of physical work, and as he walked towards Reggie, the smaller man instinctively took a step back. "We need to talk, Reggie," Michael said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "I got nothing to say to you, Mike," Reggie stammered, trying to regain his footing to project a bravado he did not feel. Michael didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "I think you do," he said, stopping just a foot from him. "I've been doing some thinking about our little chat at the hardware store, and I've been doing some research. I had a second, more advanced DNA test done for my son, at a state lab, the kind of test that can detect irregularities, the kind that can tell if a sample has been tampered with. It was a complete and utter bluff, but he delivered it with the cold certainty of a man holding a royal flush." Reggie's eyes darted around, looking for an escape. "I don't know what you're talking about. Your family problems are your own, man." "Are they?" Michael said, taking another small step forward. "Because it's a funny coincidence, isn't it? That right after you whisper your poison in my ear, I go to a lab, Gen Lab, and get a result that blows up my life. And it's an even funnier coincidence when I find out that Brenda's niece, a young woman named Elisa, happens to work as a lab tech at that very same lab. Now, what do you think the odds of that are, Reggie?" The moment he said Elisa's name, he knew he had her. Reggie's face crumpled. The bravado, the anger, the resentment, it all dissolved, leaving behind the pathetic, frightened face of a man who had been caught. The fear of legal consequences, of fraud, of dragging his own family member into a criminal investigation was the one thing that could penetrate his armor of spite. "It was just a joke," Reggie whispered, his voice trembling. "A stupid joke that went too far." "It wasn't a joke," Michael said, his voice like ice. "Tell me. Tell me everything. Now." And Reggie did. The whole sordid, pathetic story came spilling out. His decade-long jealousy, his bitterness over his own failures, the sight of Michael's success and his beautiful family, it had all festered. When he'd run into Michael, he'd seen his chance. He admitted to tracking down his niece, Elisa. He'd preyed on her sympathies, feeding her a twisted story about how Michael had destroyed her Aunt Brenda's life, painting him as a monster. He'd convinced the impressionable young woman that a small act of tampering, just switching the vial numbers on a report, would be a righteous act of family justice. It was a confession of an evil so petty, so profoundly selfish and destructive that Michael felt a wave of nausea. He had allowed this. He had allowed this small, bitter man to take a wrecking ball to his life. The confession brought no triumph, only a deep, chilling sickness in the pit of his stomach. He had betrayed Sharon. He had broken her heart, shattered her trust, and put his own children through hell, all because he had chosen to believe this pathetic, whispering snake over the woman who had given him 15 years of her life. He turned his back on Reggie, leaving him trembling by the truck. The truth, which he had so desperately sought, was now a fire in his gut. The weight of his guilt was immense, a physical thing that made it hard to breathe. He got in his truck, his hands shaking, his mind reeling. He had to find Sharon. He had to tell her. He had to, somehow, some way, begin the impossible task of atoning for a sin so profound he wasn't sure it could ever be forgiven. The confession from Reggie Hudson was a key, but it did not unlock the door to my home. Michael stood in the dust of the construction site, the pathetic, whining voice of his former partner still echoing in his ears, and knew that the truth was not a simple thing he could carry back to me like a trophy. It was a mirror, and in it, he saw only his own profound failure. He was a man drowning in a sea of his own making, and an apology was not a life raft. He knew he couldn't just show up at my door. He had forfeited that right. The home he had walked out of was no longer his to simply walk back into. He had to earn his passage. His phone call came an hour later. I was in the kitchen, numbly trying to decide if I had the energy to make dinner for myself and Brianna, when my phone buzzed with a number I recognized as his brother David's. My first instinct was to ignore it, a sharp, protective reflex against further pain, but a stronger, deeper part of me, the part that was still a wife, the part that still held a fragile hope for my family, answered the call. Sharon? His voice was a ruin. It was stripped of all its usual confidence, all its easy authority. It was the voice of a broken man. Sharon, please, please don't hang up. I said nothing, my silence a cold, hard wall. I know, he said, his words stumbling over a ragged breath. I know everything. About Reggie, about the lab, Sharon. I was wrong. Oh, God, I was so wrong. I was a fool, and I have been living in a nightmare of my own making. There are no words to tell you how sorry I am. The apology which I had craved for 2 agonizing weeks now felt distant and inadequate, a small bandage on a gaping wound. What do you want, Michael? I asked, my voice flat, devoid of the emotion that was churning inside me. I need to see you, he said, a desperate urgency in his tone. But not just me. I need you to hear this, all of it. There's something else. Something you need to know, something I can't explain over the phone. I've been talking to that geneticist at Emory, Doctor Thorne. He paused. Can you meet me there, at the lab? I've arranged a family consultation for tomorrow morning. I need you to bring Brianna and Marcus. Please, Sharon, it's the only way to make this right. It's the only way to put our family back together, a meeting at a lab. It was a bizarre clinical request, but in it, I heard something more than just his guilt. I heard a plan. He was not just apologizing. He was trying to fix what he had broken. A part of me, the wounded, angry part, wanted to say no, to make him suffer in his exile. But a larger part, the part that was a mother, the part that looked at my 2 children who were fractured by this crisis, knew that we had to see this through to the absolute end. The truth was the only thing that could heal us now, whatever that truth turned out to be. We'll be there, I said, and hung up the phone before he could say another word. That night, I told the children, I sat them both down in the living room, the first time the 3 of us had been together for more than a few minutes since this had all begun. We're going to see your father tomorrow morning, I said, my voice steady. We're going to a genetics lab. He says he has something he needs to tell us. Marcus, who had been quiet and withdrawn, his 10-year-old face clouded with a confusion he couldn't articulate, just nodded. But Brianna, my sharp, wounded daughter, looked at me, her eyes full of a painful mixture of hope and fear. Is it over? She whispered. I don't know, honey, I said, pulling her into a hug, the first one she had allowed in days. But we're going to find out. Together. The air in the house was thick with a fragile, terrifying hope. We were a family on the brink, about to walk into a sterile, scientific room to learn if we could ever truly be a family again. The consultation room at the Emory lab was a world of soft grays and muted blues, a space designed to be calming, but to me, it felt like a holding cell. We were a fractured family, arranged on the comfortable chairs like strangers waiting for a verdict. Michael sat slightly apart, a man marooned on an island of his own guilt. He looked as if he hadn't slept in a week, his face etched with a pain that was raw and profound. I sat opposite him, a bastion of tense composure, with Brianna on one side and Marcus on the other. My children were a study in anxious confusion, their eyes darting from my face to their father's, trying to read the language of a silent, catastrophic war they did not understand. The air was thick with everything that had not been said, heavy with the weight of a 15-year trust that had been shattered. Before the doctor arrived, Michael finally broke the silence. He leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees, and looked at us, his family, the people he had wounded so deeply. His voice when he spoke was a low, ragged thing, stripped of all pride. There's something you all need to hear, he began, his gaze moving from me to Brianna and finally to Marcus. You need to hear it from me, before the doctors, before anyone else. He took a deep, shuddering breath. The first DNA test. It wasn't a mistake. It was a lie. He then recounted the entire sordid story, forcing himself through the painful, humiliating details. He told us about Reggie's bitter, simmering jealousy and the malicious plot it had spawned. He told us how Reggie had tracked down Brenda's niece, Elisa, a young woman with a misguided loyalty, and had manipulated her, convincing her to tamper with the test results. He spared no one, least of all himself. He preyed on her, but I was the one who let the poison in, he said, his eyes finally meeting mine, and I saw a look of self-loathing so profound it made my heart ache. He handed me the gun, but I was the one who pulled the trigger. I was so blinded by my own pride, by my own stupid fear, that I couldn't see the truth that was standing right in front of me. I failed you, Sharon. I failed our family. And I am so, so sorry. He then turned to our children. I'm sorry for the pain I've caused you. For the fear and confusion. None of this was your fault. It was mine. The confession hung in the sterile air, a bombshell of truth that left us all momentarily speechless. Brianna stared at her father, her expression a mixture of shock and a dawning, horrified understanding. Marcus just looked small, his 10-year-old mind trying to grapple with the adult concepts of jealousy and betrayal. I felt a wave of profound sadness wash over me, sadness for the man I loved, who had been so easily manipulated, and for the family that had been so senselessly victimized. It was at that moment of raw, emotional exposure that the door opened, and Dr. Thorne entered. He was a tall, kind-faced man in a white lab coat, and he held a file in his hands. He took in the scene with a quick, empathetic glance. I see you've already begun the conversation, he said gently. He sat down and placed the file on the table. I can, at least, provide some official confirmation, a notarized and signed confession from a Mr. Reggie Hudson was delivered to my office by a courier this morning. He has admitted to conspiring with an employee of GenLab to deliberately falsify the results of your initial paternity test. As far as the law is concerned, that test is fraudulent. And I have no doubt that he and his accomplice will be facing serious legal consequences. A collective sigh of relief went through the room. It was the official, legal end to the nightmare, but Dr. Thorne held up a hand. However, he said, his expression turning from serious to intrigued, that still leaves us with a fascinating scientific puzzle. Mr. Hudson's fraudulent test and our own initial and very valid test both produced the same negative result. And that, he said, opening the file, is what I've asked you all here to discuss. He turned the file around to show us a series of complex-looking charts. When we were faced with this contradiction, your absolute certainty, Mrs. Miller, against our repeated results, we decided to run a more advanced test, a whole genome sequence on both Michael and Marcus. He pointed to a specific chart, a long string of letters. This is a map of a specific part of the Y chromosome, the part we use for standard paternity testing. A son inherits this from his father, and it should be a perfect match. He then pointed to Michael's chart, circling a small section. This, Mr. Miller, is you. And right here, you have a rare, harmless, but very significant genetic mutation. It's the genetic equivalent of a single unique typo and a very long password. The standard test is programmed to look for the normal sequence. When it sees your typo, it registers it as a non-match, even though you are, in fact, the correct user. He then slid a second chart next to the first. It was Marcus's. And this, he said, his voice filled with the genuine excitement of a scientist who has solved a puzzle, is your son. And right here, in the exact same spot, he has the exact same 1 in a million typo. A marker he could only have inherited from you. He closed the file and looked at us, his eyes bright. So, while Mr. Hudson's plot was malicious, it was also, ironically, completely redundant. Any standard test you took was always going to fail. He leaned forward and gave us a warm, genuine smile. But this test, the most advanced of its kind, leaves no room for any doubt or any error. Mr. Miller, you are, with 100% scientific certainty, Marcus's biological father. The doctor's words fell into the silent room with the weight of a final judgment, a truth so absolute and so bizarre that it seemed to bend the very air around us. 100%. The two revelations, one of human malice, the other of a cosmic genetic quirk, collided in our minds. A stunning 1-2 punch that left us all breathless. We were the victims of a calculated, vicious lie, but we were also the subjects of a 1 in a million biological miracle. My husband was innocent of the sin I had been accused of, but guilty of a catastrophic failure of faith. The sheer, dizzying complexity of it all was too much to process. We sat there, a family suspended in a moment of disbelief, the sterile quiet of the lab the only sound in the universe. The unbearable tension was finally broken by the one person in the room still innocent enough to see the wonder in the chaos, our son. Marcus, who had been sitting quietly trying to follow the adult conversation with wide, serious eyes, finally processed the doctor's words. A slow grin spread across his face, and he looked from Doctor Thorne to his dad, his expression a mixture of awe and excitement. "So, wait," he said, his voice piping up in the silent room. "I have a genetic mutation? Like in the X-Men? Is that why I'm so good at basketball?" For a second, nobody moved. Then, a sound I thought I might never hear again in this room in this lifetime bubbled up from my chest. It was a laugh. It was a shaky, tear-choked, half-hysterical sound, but it was a real laugh. Michael let out a choked sob that was also a laugh. Brianna, her face still stained with tears, cracked a watery smile. The absurdity, the sheer, beautiful innocence of his question had broken the spell. It punctured the balloon of our adult tragedy with the perfect, simple logic of a 10-year-old boy. It reminded us that even in the midst of the most profound crisis, life, in all its strange and wonderful forms, goes on. We all began to laugh then, a messy, cathartic, and profoundly healing sound that filled the sterile room with the warmth of our shared relief. The laughter subsided, leaving behind a new emotional landscape. The relief for Brianna was immediately followed by a fresh wave of guilt. Her scientific certainty had been proven hollow, and her accusations against me now felt like a terrible betrayal. She turned to me, her young face crumpling, her eyes flooded with remorse. "Mom," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "I am so sorry. I was so awful. I should have believed you. I should have trusted you. I'm so sorry." She launched herself into my arms, and I held her tight, stroking her hair. "Oh, honey, no," I whispered into her ear, my own tears starting anew. "You were scared and confused. We all were. There is nothing to forgive." I looked over her shoulder at Michael, and I knew my words were for him as well. We had all been victims of a lie that had been designed to seem irrefutable. And then there was just Michael and me. The children were reconciling. The outside world and its villains had been exposed. The science had been explained. All that was left was the original wound, the breach between a husband and a wife. He looked at me, his face a ruin of relief and a shame so deep it was painful to witness. He had gotten his son back, his family back. But he knew with a terrible certainty that he had lost something precious and irreplaceable. My unconditional trust. He didn't have to say it. I could see it in his eyes. The scientific anomaly did not excuse him. In a way, it made his failure even more profound. He had been given a test, not of genetics, but of faith, and he had failed it utterly. My anger, which had been a righteous fire, was gone. My hurt, which had been a sharp, piercing pain, had dulled to a deep, sorrowful ache. All I felt now was a profound sense of weary sadness for what we had lost, for the beautiful, simple trust we had once shared. I saw the fear in his eyes, the fear that he had broken something that could never be repaired. And in that moment, in an act of grace that seemed to come from a place outside myself, I reached my hand across the table. He looked down at my hand as if it were a life raft. Slowly, hesitantly, he reached out and took it. His own hand was trembling. It was not a gesture of forgiveness, not yet. It was too soon for that. It was an acknowledgement that his pain, his confusion, his guilt were real. It was a signal that the bridge between us, while badly damaged, had not been completely destroyed. "We were both victims of a terrible lie, Michael," I said softly, my voice barely a whisper. "But we're here now. Together." Dr. Thorne, with a tactful and gentle smile, gathered his file. "I think my work here is done," he said. "My office will forward all the official documentation to your legal counsel. I wish you all the very best." And then he was gone, leaving the four of us alone for the first time as a family that was once again whole. We gathered our things, a quiet, stunned group of survivors. We walked out of the consultation room, out of the lab, and into the bright, unforgiving sunlight of the afternoon. We were not the same family that had walked in. We had been shattered, tested, and then miraculously pieced back together. The cracks were still there, and I knew they would be for a long time. But as we walked to the car, my son's excited chatter about his newfound mutant powers filling the air, I felt the trembling in my husband's hand, still holding mine. The journey back to the home we once knew, the home built on a foundation of unshakable trust, would be the longest journey of all. But for the first time in weeks, I believed it was a journey we could make together. We came home from the lab that day as a family, but we were not the same family that had left. We were a collection of survivors, blinking in the bright afternoon sun, the geography of our relationships irrevocably altered. The truth, in all its bizarre and layered complexity, was finally out in the open, and the relief was immense. But the truth did not magically heal the wounds. Michael came home with us, but he entered the house like a guest, an exile granted a temporary probationary return. The immediate crisis was over, the external enemies vanquished, but the emotional debris of the last few weeks lay thick and heavy in the air between us. A home, I was learning, is built not just of wood and nails, but of trust, and the framework of our trust had been shattered. The days that followed were a slow, awkward dance of reconnection. Michael was a man desperate to atone. He was overly attentive, endlessly helpful, his every action a quiet, desperate plea for forgiveness. He made coffee in the morning, helped the kids with their homework, fixed a squeaky hinge on the back door that I had been complaining about for months. He was trying so hard, so earnestly to be the husband he should have been, but there was a wall between us, a pane of thick, soundproof glass. I could see his remorse, I could acknowledge his efforts, but I couldn't feel them. The wound he had inflicted was too deep, too raw. The memory of his accusation, of the pain in his eyes when he had called Marcus another man's child, was a ghost that sat between us at the dinner table. I was polite. I was civil. But I was distant. I had spent 2 weeks building a fortress around my heart to survive his betrayal, and I didn't know how to lower the drawbridge. Our children, caught in the crossfire, navigated this new, fragile peace with a sensitivity that broke my heart. Brianna, consumed by her own guilt for having doubted me, became my shadow, my fierce and loyal protector. Marcus, for his part, seemed to be the only one who had processed the whole affair with a simple, uncomplicated joy. He had embraced his mutant status with the full force of his 10-year-old imagination, and it had become the new, central pillar of his identity. It was his idea to have a "we're not broken" family dinner that Friday night. "We should order pizzas," he announced, to celebrate that I have superhero genes and Dad's home. The simple, innocent logic was impossible to refuse. And so we found ourselves gathered around the same dining room table that had been the stage for the initial explosion of our lives. The atmosphere was thick with a determined, almost painful effort at normalcy. Michael brought home 4 different kinds of pizza. Brianna made a salad. I lit the candles, the same ones from our anniversary, and for a terrifying moment, I was transported back to that awful night. But then Marcus, in between enormous bites of pepperoni pizza, started telling us about his theories for his mutant powers. "I bet that's why I can almost dunk," he said, his face serious. "The mutation probably gives my legs extra spring. Do you think if I concentrate really hard, I could make stuff float?" Brianna rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. Michael laughed. A real, genuine laugh, the first I had heard from him in weeks. And I found myself smiling too. It was a fragile, tentative thing, but it was real. In the innocent, resilient world of our son, our family's near-catastrophic trauma was being reframed as a cool superhero origin story. It was a reminder that children have a miraculous ability to find the light, even in the deepest darkness. It was a lesson I was still struggling to learn. Later, after the kids had gone to bed, the fragile peace dissipated and the heavy, adult silence returned. The remnants of the pizza dinner sat on the table between us. A slightly less tragic tableau than the anniversary one, but a testament to our new, broken reality nonetheless. Michael sat there, his hands wrapped around a coffee mug, his eyes full of a pain I knew so well because it mirrored my own. I wanted to reach out to him. I wanted to tell him it was okay, that we would be okay. But I couldn't. The words wouldn't come, because I didn't know if they were true. Forgiveness, I was beginning to understand, was not a simple choice. It was not a switch you could just flip. It was a slow, arduous journey, and I had no idea if I had the strength to make it. The children's laughter faded as they went upstairs, leaving behind a silence in the house that was deeper and more complicated than any that had come before. The forced cheerfulness of our family dinner evaporated, and Michael and I were left alone at the table, two strangers in a familiar land, the ruins of our shared history between us. He sat there, staring into his now cold coffee, a man lost in a wilderness of his own making. I could see the battle raging within him. He wanted to speak, to bridge the vast, silent chasm that separated us, but he was terrified of taking a wrong step, of making the wound even deeper. And I, in my own fortress of hurt, waited. I knew with a certainty that was both empowering and exhausting that this first step had to be his. Finally, he looked up, his eyes meeting mine. The raw, undisguised pain in them was a mirror of my own. "I've been going over it and over it in my head," he said, his voice a low, hesitant rumble, trying to understand how I could have been so blind. So stupid. He shook his head, a gesture of profound self-disgust. "And I know I've blamed Reggie, I've blamed the test, but that's not the truth, not the real truth." He took a deep breath, the kind a man takes before he dives into cold, deep water. "The fault was mine, Sharon. The rot started with me. I let Reggie's poison in because there was a part of me, a small, ugly part, I never wanted to admit was there, that was ready to believe it." I listened, my heart a still quiet thing in my chest, waiting. This was different from his frantic, guilt-ridden apologies at the lab. This was something quieter, deeper. This was a reckoning. "Marcus," he continued, his voice thick with emotion, "he's so different from me. He's this brilliant, artistic, free spirit. And I'm not. I'm a builder. I'm concrete and rebar and straight lines, and I've always been so proud of him, so in awe of him. But I guess a part of me, a deeply insecure part, could never quite believe that someone so wonderful could have come from me. It was my own stupid male pride, my own fear that I wasn't enough. Reggie didn't create the doubt, Sharon. He just gave it a voice. And I chose to listen to that voice instead of the voice of our 15 years. I broke the most important promise we ever made to each other. Not fidelity, faith. I stopped having faith in you. And that is a sin I will carry for the rest of my life. His confession was a key. Turning the lock on a door inside me, I thought had been rusted shut forever. His raw, brutal honesty was not an excuse. It was an explanation. And it gave me the space to finally give a voice to the true nature of my own pain. "It wasn't the accusation, Michael," I said, my own voice quiet, but clear and strong. "I mean, it was horrible, but that wasn't the part that broke me." I looked at him, needing him to understand the deepest, most painful layer of his betrayal. The part that broke me was that you believed it, so quickly, so easily. In an instant, you erased 15 years. You erased every time I held your hand when you were scared about the business, every time we stayed up all night with a sick child, every meal, every laugh, every promise. You took our entire history, our beautiful, real, and complicated history, and you threw it away because of a whisper from a man you hate and a piece of paper from a lab you'd never heard of. You made me a stranger in my own life. The worst part wasn't that you thought I had cheated, Michael. The worst part was that you thought I was capable of it. Tears were streaming down his face now, silent tears of a profound and terrible grief for what he had done. He didn't defend himself. He didn't offer any counter-argument. He just sat there and took it. He listened, and he let my truth land on him with its full, devastating weight. He was finally, truly hearing me. This painful, honest exchange was the first real conversation we had had in weeks. We were not accuser and defendant. We were just two people who loved each other, trying to find our way back through a dark and terrible wood. "How do we fix this?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "How can I ever earn back your trust?" "I don't know," I said, and the honesty of that admission was both terrifying and liberating. "I don't know if we can go back to the way we were. That trust, the blind, easy trust we had, I think it's gone forever." I saw the flicker of despair in his eyes, and I reached out, my hand covering his on the table. It was the first time I had initiated contact since he had come home, But maybe, I continued softly, that's not a bad thing. Maybe we can build something new, something stronger, something that isn't based on blind faith, but on a truth that we have fought for. Something that has been tested by the worst fire and has somehow miraculously survived. He turned his hand over and laced his fingers through mine, his grip both desperate and tender. The long, difficult work of rebuilding was just beginning. But for the first time, it felt possible. 1 year later, we sat at the same dining room table on the 16th anniversary of our wedding. The July air was just as warm, the scent of lilies from my garden just as sweet, but the atmosphere was a world away from the fragile, unknowing peace of the year before. That peace had been a thin sheet of ice over a deep, cold ocean. The peace we felt now was something else entirely. It was a deep, resilient, and hard-won tranquility forged in the fires of the worst year of our lives. The children were with us, their laughter easy and genuine. Brianna, home from her first year of college, was a young woman now, her eyes filled with a new profound empathy. Marcus, on the cusp of his 12th birthday, was still obsessed with his mutant gene, which he now credited for his recent success in making the school's top basketball team. The ghosts of the past year were not gone, but they were no longer menacing specters. They were quiet, seated guests at our table, reminders of the fragility of trust and the fierce, stubborn strength of love. After the last of the peach cobbler was gone, Michael reached across the table and took my hand. "Happy anniversary, Sharon," he said, his voice quiet, his eyes holding mine with an open, vulnerable sincerity that was still new to me and still breathtaking. He placed a small, elegantly wrapped box on the table in front of me. For a single fleeting heartbeat, the image of the white envelope flashed in my mind, a ghost of a past trauma. But this was different. This was a gift, not a verdict. "Don't worry," Marcus piped up with a grin. "I checked. It's not a science experiment." We all laughed, and the last of the tension dissipated. With steady hands, I unwrapped the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a simple, beautiful silver locket. It was lovely, but it was what he said next. That was the true gift. "Open it," he urged, his voice thick with emotion. I clicked open the delicate clasp. On one side was a tiny, perfect photograph of Brianna and Marcus, their arms around each other, grinning at the camera. On the other side, instead of a photo, there was a microscopic, intricate engraving, a series of letters and numbers that looked like a secret code. "I had a jeweler engrave it," Michael explained, his thumb gently stroking the back of my hand. "It's the specific sequence of our family's genetic typo. The mutation. The part of us that almost tore us apart." He looked at me, his eyes full of a love that was deeper and more profound than any I had seen before. I wanted to take the source of our greatest pain and turn it into a symbol of our greatest strength. It's the secret code that makes us unique, flawed, and unbreakable. It's the story of us. Tears welled in my eyes as I looked from the beautiful, strange engraving to the face of my husband. He had taken the most painful chapter of our lives and had turned it into a work of art, a testament to our survival. He had acknowledged the scar, and in doing so, he had helped to finally, truly heal it. He leaned in close, his voice a whisper meant only for me. "I promise this year, and every year from now on, only flowers and diamonds." I closed the locket, the cool silver a comforting weight in my palm. I looked at him, at the man who had journeyed through a hell of his own making and had come back to me, humbled and honest and whole. "This," I said, my voice choked with tears of a joy so deep it hurt, "is better than diamonds." Later that night, after the children were in bed, we sat on the back porch, the sounds of the summer night a peaceful symphony around us. We had been to counseling. We had learned to talk, to really talk, to listen. We had learned that trust is not a static thing you are given once, like a wedding gift. It is a living, breathing organism that must be tended to, nurtured, and protected every single day. The blind, easy trust we had once shared was gone forever, and I was grateful. The new trust we had built in its place was infinitely stronger, for it was not born of innocence, but of experience. It was a conscious choice, a daily recommitment we made to each other. Our family had been tested by a perfect storm of human malice and cosmic chance. We had been shattered. But in the slow, difficult, and painful work of putting ourselves back together, we had created something new, something stronger, something real. We were not a perfect family. But we were a true one. And in the quiet, peaceful dark, that felt like the greatest gift of all.